Good morning to everyone. I am so awed at so many people here. It is really a pleasure for both my husband and myself to be among all of you this morning. And so we thank everyone for having us. And in particular, Father, what a way to have a birthday party. Wow! You certainly sent out a big invite list and you got good returns too. So I wanted to take just a few minutes, if I might, to share some personal information with you. If you find in your program the bio of the first speaker, you will find a very well-written piece of military documentation. There is everything in there that makes for good military editing. And it's all true, I think. And it certainly reflects the military career of your first speaker. But I wanted to share with you this morning the man behind that military document. I wanted to tell you what it has been like to be in his presence for 10 years of our lives. My husband and I live here in Vienna, and truth be known, we probably belong to OLGC. However, if truth be known, we've been actively engaged in the military community at Fort Myer, Joint Base Myer, Henderson Hall, for the last 40 years. My husband is retired Army, and there's something about being retired Army, in many cases, that you tend to go where you feel comfortable. With a group as large as this in Northern Virginia, I am sure that every one of the branches of the military service is represented out there, whether it's active duty, reserve, or whatever. And so you can probably relate to our feelings. When military move all over the world, they come to rest at what makes them feel comfortable. And every military installation has a faith-based community. And that's where most of us end up roosting. Is first you find the commissary. Second, you look for the clinic, because you never know. Third, you want to find out where the MPs have the radar running. And my husband was part of the MPs at one time. But most importantly, you find the chapel. And that's what we did. And that's where we found Father Kennehan. Now, we were there when he came. So we always wonder, what's the new guy going to be like? You know, what's he going to expect of us? How is he going to want things done? Well, it didn't take us too long to get Father Kennehan into step with how things were operating. The most important thing for us was Father Kennehan's gracious love of being there to support all of the troops. And we are all retired, active duty, DOD civilian, neighbors from Arlington, whomever. He was always there for them. When my husband had a stroke 6 years ago, and it was not expected that he would pull through, of course, before I even called my sons, I called Father Kennehan. I said, you gotta help me. Len's had a stroke. And before I got the phone back in my purse, Father Kennehan had activated everything. He had a call out to the JAG officer at Fort Myer to help us with the legal stuff. He talked with the people at Innova in the admitting office to help us with all of this other kinds of things you have to do. He went up on the altar that evening and he brought the community on board. He did everything for us. Father Kennehan activated the troops, as they say. He showed up at the hospital. He brought Holy Communion. He had others show up. There wasn't a single thing that he left undone. And that is so characteristic of Father Dave. So very characteristic. When I had trouble at the Pentagon Credit Union because they didn't like the power of attorney, who did I call? Father Dave. And he came over. When we had to go to a wedding and my husband couldn't go, who did I call? Father Dave. And he said, you can be my date for the weekend. Well, hello. By then, I was well aware of the St. Francis de Sales. I was well aware of Father Dave's commitment, and it was just really such a wonderful experience for me to have someone like Father Dave in our lives. So when he retired and everybody's saying, how are we going to live without him, we get our new Catholic chaplain, who was opposite. Loud, gregarious, boisterous, full of fun, just, a really great guy. And my husband looked at him one day and he said to him, Father Fred, you're okay, but you're not Father Dave. And my husband has been known to never mince words. It's straight off the cuff. He's not Irish for nothing. And he told him, he said, I miss Father Dave. And Father Fred said, I'm sure you do. And certainly we all did miss him when he left, but we know that he is still with us in spirit. In fact, this is my second Salesian event this week. We had a 3-day retreat at Fort Myer earlier in the week with some friends and colleagues of the priests who are here today. So at least I'm behaving myself for 1 week during Lent. I just want to end by saying that you probably noticed I'm not the tallest person in this room. And even though I prayed like you wouldn't believe when I was 14 to reach 5 feet, it never happened. In fact, when I got to be much older than 14, I started to get shorter instead of taller. And as a lector, I think Father Dave felt that I could project better. Imagine that, project better if I had a stool to stand on. So the first thing he did this morning was look for the stool, and I'm standing on it. But we also had a stool down at Fort Myer that had been crafted for Madeleine Albright. There are occasions at Joint Base Myer Henderson Hall where there are dignitaries who come in for special events. And she was going to speak at one of them, and someone had the same feeling that maybe she would need a little help. So they crafted a stool, and they covered it with nice fabric, and they slipped it underneath so it could be brought out and she could stand on it. And Father Dave tried for months to get me to use that stool. And then it became an Irish will against an Irish will. And finally, to shut him up, I used the stool. And once again, he had raised me up in this world. So I hope that you are going to have, and I know you are going to have, a most memorable morning today. And I hope that you will keep us in your prayers. And I hope, above all else, that you have health and happiness always in your families. But the most important thing is, please welcome our very, very dear Catholic chaplain, our very, very dear friend, Father Dave Kennehan.
I asked Pat to keep that to 2 minutes. She still is not listening to me. Well, you know a little bit about me now, and I'd like to know a little bit about you folks. So, how many of you are here for the very first time? Any first-timers? Wow. How many are here from OLGC? Outstanding. John Neumann. Other parishes in Virginia. Whoa. Parishes in Maryland. District of Columbia. Other. Who am I leaving out? North Carolina. Welcome to you all. I'd like to start by thanking Carol Swiger and her team for inviting me to be one of the speakers today. She is a very persuasive woman, if you don't know her. She and her husband Mike asked me after a Sunday Mass at John Neumann last April 2017 to consider being one of the speakers for this event. Like any good oblate, I demurred. Oh, Carol, I am not an expert in Salesian spirituality. There are many much better qualified men and women than I. She and Mike had heard this story before. As a matter of fact, when she was inspired to start this event 15 years ago, she heard similar stories from several of my oblate confreres. This from men whose oblate charism calls us to spread Salesian spirituality. Anyway, the night before I was to meet with Carol and Mike in an effort to convince me, I had a dream. And the theme for the talk actually came to me in that dream. And so it was God, Jesus, St. Francis, St. Jane, St. Mother Abiot shamed me into it. From April 2017 until today, this year has been truly like a second novitiate for me. That's the year in which we oblates study about Salesian spirituality, our patrons, our charism, our founders, the introduction to devout life, the treatise on the love of God, our constitutions, and the spiritual directory. And for me, that year was August 1964 to August 1965. Thank you, Carol and team, for helping me to return to my roots, to the springtime of my first fervor, we like to say. We were taught always to make a direction of intention before beginning a new action. And so, will you turn with me to page 14, if you're not there already, in your program. You'll see there the direction of intention. Let's pray this together. My God, I give you this day. I offer you all the good I shall do in this action, and I promise to accept, for love of you, all the difficulties that I shall meet. Help me to conduct myself this day in a manner pleasing to you. I'll be asking you to pray with me at different times throughout this talk. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, a great Jewish theologian and mystic, wrote, "Prayer is our humble answer to the inconceivable surprise of living. It is all we can offer in return for the mystery by which we live." Now allow me to put this talk into a faith context. We live in a universe that scientists believe to be almost 14 billion years old, and at least 46 billion light years from its center to its edge, but could well be infinite and ever expanding. Now, a light year is a unit of distance, not time. And light travels at about 670 million miles per hour. There are at least 100 billion to as many as 2 trillion galaxies in this universe. And our little Milky Way galaxy is in one tiny corner of this mind-boggling expanse. Our planet, Mother Earth, is only one of 8, we think, in our solar system. We find ourselves in what is called the Northern Hemisphere, in a nation called the United States of America, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, in the city of Vienna. Are you getting the picture? If this chapel is the universe, and my fist is our solar system, then each of us is less than a speck of dust. And yet, the God who created all of this loved us enough to give each of us the gift of life. That's the faith context. Rabbi Heschel, God rest his soul, once prayed, "Dear Lord, grant me the grace of wonder. Surprise me with your marvelous things without number. I do not ask to see the reason for it all. I ask only to share the wonder of it all." Which brings me to our topic for today in this talk. My life with Jesus, be not afraid. You'll notice it's a little twist on the theme for the entire day. Now I'm asking you to say that with me. My life with Jesus, be not afraid. One more time. My life with Jesus, be not afraid. Each of us has a life with Jesus, whether we reflect on it or not. And it is the reason that we do not have to be afraid. Each of us has been given the gift of life. We didn't choose our family, our gender, our race, our nationality, but here we are. And we are challenged by Christ himself to do something positive with our lives. We all have a story to tell. We're writing it every day. I wish there were time for each of us to tell about his or her spiritual journey from birth till now, from baptism onward. But alas, I've only been given 45 minutes, and Carol is very strict. My talk, as indicated in the program, will consist of a series of stories. Jesus was a great storyteller, as you know, and so I think I'm in pretty good company with this approach. With help from the stories of some real people, I'd like to look at the different phases of life: childhood, adolescence, adulthood, and what I now like to call, since I'm there, the wisdom years. During these phases, our faith journey develops and we get ready to answer the critical question, how can I serve? How does God expect me to use this great gift of life, this gift of faith? So what is faith? Rabbi Heschel wrote, "Faith isn't some constant state of belief, but rather a sort of faithfulness, a loyalty to the moments when we've had faith." The man in the scriptures, pleading with Jesus, said it beautifully. "Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief." We'll come back to this thought a bit later. My life with Jesus. Be not afraid. My faith has been strengthened over and over by children and their simple love for Jesus. And so let me tell you the story of Gabriel Stats. I met him at St. Vincent de Paul Parish in Salt Lake City, Utah in 1983. Now this is kind of ironic because Francis de Sales and Vincent de Paul were friends. And Francis would eventually entrust the spiritual guidance of the first Visitation Monastery in Paris to Vincent. Gabriel was only 5 years old when I met him. So he hadn't made his first Holy Communion yet. But he would come up after communion with the other children for an individual blessing. Gabriel was born here on the East Coast with an RH problem that required blood transfusions. When I met him, he was a very sick little boy with what the doctors believed was one of the early cases of AIDS. His mom, Tricia, didn't like the traditional bedtime prayer. Now I lay me down to sleep. If I should die. So Gabriel had his own night prayer. Thank you, God, for this day. Thank you for the mountains. Thank you for Big Bird and Kermit. God bless Mommy and Daddy. When I would forget or couldn't bless the children for some reason on a particular Sunday, Gabriel would be very sad. His mom told me that he lived for that blessing. It was his special time with God. In early January 1984, this is before I went in the Army, I was called to Children's Hospital in Salt Lake to anoint Gabriel. And not long after that, I had his funeral. Little Gabriel witnessed truly to the suffering of Jesus. We probably never will know this side of eternity the exact purpose of his suffering. But as a Carmelite sister friend said to me at the time, Father, there is a purpose. Father William O'Malley, a Jesuit, in his wonderful little book, Help My Unbelief. You can get this by Googling it on Amazon. In his book, Help My Unbelief, explains that Jesus' life and death, more than anything, showed us how to live and die. Gabriel never understood any of this, but his courage and faith keep me going. As we all know from the scriptures, Jesus had a great love for little children. Suffer the children to come unto me. And when his disciples asked him, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? He called over a child, placed it in their midst, and said, unless you turn and become like children, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. I know one thing for certain. Little guys and gals like Gabriel make me very reluctant to ever complain about my lot in life. It's more than a tad ironic that the name Gabriel means hero of God. By the way, there was controversy among liturgists back in the 80s, questioning the appropriateness of blessing children separately after Holy Communion. It was not deemed liturgically proper. I'm sorry, Gerard. You've heard the joke about the difference between a liturgist and a terrorist. You can negotiate with a terrorist. After Gabriel, I never forgot to bless the children. And if a liturgist complained, he or she got the long version of Gabriel's story. Please turn with me now in your program to page 15 if you're not there already, and pray with me the parents' prayer. Dear Lord, there is no way to remove the pain. The grief is real. The only sanity is to know, to believe in a life beyond with you. And all the scales are righted, and the sufferings are made good. We trust you in your promise that while this child's life on earth is done, his life beyond is set. At least, lose him, let him go into your arms, and by faith receive in return the boundless comfort of the presence. That is all. That is enough. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. My life with Jesus. Be not afraid. Adolescence can be a challenging time. And like many of the oblate sisters, brothers, and priests here, the visitandines, and others, I spent many years teaching high school. We could tell you crazy stories about those years. But in this section, I'd like to use the young Francis de Sales as my example. I will be borrowing heavily from the wonderful biography of Father Dirk Koster, OSFS of our Dutch province, which was published in 2000 with a foreword by Father Lou Fiorelli. And this book is available downstairs, by the way. Francis was sent by his nobleman father at the age of 11, along with a tutor and a servant, to study in Paris. Being the oldest child, Francis was expected to inherit his father's title and the family estate. But Father Koster quotes him, Francis that is, having said to the Abbess Angelique Arnaud, "Later in life, from my 12th year on, I was determined to belong to the church, and no kingdom could have made me give it up." His father chose the finest college in Paris, the College of Navarre, favored by all of the aristocracy. But Francis chose the College of Claremont, run by the then young Jesuit order in 1534, founded in 1534. His father was not happy, but with his mother's help, Francis got his way. He would spend the next 10 years of his life studying in Paris. Now, some of you I know have been to Annecy, and so you appreciate how far it is, even today, from Paris to Annecy. And so when Francis went to Paris, for those 10 years, there was no going home. It wasn't like you hopped home to have mom do your laundry, like college kids do now. But at any rate, the Duchy of Savoy, where Francis was born, was not part of France at this time. And there was civil war raging in France between the Catholics and the Huguenots. We think we have problems today, but the turmoil caused by the Protestant Reformation at this particular time in the 16th century was horrific. and often bloody. Francis convinced his tutor, Monsieur Deage, who spent many hours himself at the Sorbonne studying theology, when he should have been accompanying Francis, to allow Francis to pursue religious studies himself when he wasn't busy with rhetoric and Latin and Greek and Hebrew and philosophy. But Monsieur Deage made him promise never to tell his father. Now, in fairness to Monsieur Deage, Francis did not need a lot of supervision. He was a highly motivated and conscientious student. But during these religious studies, he was exposed to the Calvinist doctrine of predestination. And he became convinced that he was among the damned. This led him to a severe depression. And he wrote in his diary, and I quote, "O Lord, at least I was allowed to love you in this life, even if I may not love you in the hereafter." In the winter of 1586-87, when Francis was 19 years old, on the way back from classes, he stopped in the church of the Dominicans and he knelt before the image of the Black Virgin. As he prayed the Memorare, Father Coster tells us, the feeling of depression flowed away. It disappeared and left no trace. An indescribable feeling of relief and peace took hold of his entire being. It was over. Francis was immensely grateful, and from within, he felt the need to dedicate himself forever to God. He made a vow of chastity. It was a promise made spontaneously, but it stayed with him and would determine the rest of his life. The painting up here next to me, and there's also a version of it in the back in the foyer, the painting next to me was done by Father Tom Ribbetts, OSFS, of the Toledo, Detroit province, which is my province, and Tom is a very, very good friend. He's done a series of paintings of Francis as a young man. The first was commissioned by St. Francis de Sales High School in Toledo, Ohio, and it depicts Francis as a student in Padua. It's on page 14 in your program. Tom has also done one of Francis in Padua writing his personal rule of life, which is on page 17 in your program. And presently he's working on a fourth painting of Francis as a young priest. A copy of this particular painting on page 16 in your program hangs in the hallway over the student lockers at Salesianum High School in Wilmington, Delaware, so that the young men can look up and relate. To me, these paintings are a wonderful gift to the Salesian world, in that the only light portrait of Francis that we have was done in 1618, just 4 years before his death in 1622, depicting him as a bishop, a balder, older man with a full beard. This particular painting for which he sat is on page 3 in your program. What does this story of Francis, through his adolescent years, tell us? For me, it's that even the greatest saints of the church, a doctor of the church no less in this case, had their spiritual struggles. St. John of the Cross, St. Teresa of Avila, St. Teresa of Calcutta, all tell of their dark night of the soul, a time when they did not feel close to God, when they were filled with doubt. I had a young person come to me in confession one time and share that they were having a real struggle believing in God. For their penance, I asked them to say the prayer of the man in the Gospels. Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief. Please turn with me to page 16 in your program. Let us pray together the prayer Francis prayed in Paris, lifting his depression, the Memorare. Remember, most gracious my mother, before you I stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not my petitions, but in your mercy grant me. Amen. Like the young Francis, we all have moments of doubt, of unbelief. Father O'Malley talks about this in his wonderful book, which I mentioned earlier, Help My Unbelief. As we move into the adult section of this talk, let's take a closer look at what Father O'Malley, a Jesuit priest like our Holy Father, Pope Francis, has to say. O'Malley writes in the first chapter of his book, we tend to forget that even Jesus was tempted to believe he might have been wrong. My God, why have you abandoned me? The intentions of God are so evidently biased toward evolution and growth that doubt appears to be a prerequisite of fulfilling God's will, since doubt is a hunger for better answers. I take this to mean that God expects us to doubt, to probe, to investigate, to question. It's part of our DNA. Father O'Malley says that as adults, we all face some fundamental questions. Who am I? Where do I fit into all of this? Who is this I person, stripped of all the influences I didn't choose myself? And what is my value and mission at the center of the web of relationships that effuse out from myself into my family, my neighborhood, my work, the nation, the whole human family, the mystifying universe, and beyond, I trust, into the life of the Trinity. Wow. Those are some tough questions. But being an adult means that we are willing to grapple with them. Father O'Malley goes on in a later chapter to give us some helpful definitions that enable us to do this grappling. Theology, he writes, is what we know about the God questions. Belief is what we accept as true of what we know. Religion is what we do about what we claim to believe. And what we do is a more authentic indicator of what we really believe than what we claim. But all this requires an act of faith, because certainty is not something we are going to have this side of eternity. On the contrary, O'Malley writes, trying to encapsulate in words the profoundest truths in life, like love, courage, honesty, the human spirit itself, is like trying to pinch mercury. This is why I believe that it is so important to turn to other men and women of faith who have gone before us, who have made the journey, who have lived faith-filled lives. And this brings me to one of my favorite people, Bishop Kenneth Edward Untner. My life with Jesus, be not afraid. Ken Untner was born in 1937, the seventh of 9 children. His family lived on Belle Isle. Anyone know where Belle Isle is? All right. Right there in the middle of the Detroit River, right? His dad was the caretaker there. I chose Ken Untner for several reasons. Like St. Francis de Sales, he became a bishop, was devoted to the poor, lived a simple life, shunned higher office in the church, experienced personal suffering, had a doctorate in theology, was a gifted preacher and writer. He was ordained a bishop for Saginaw, Michigan on November 24th, 1980, by John Cardinal Dearden. Bishop Untner introduced himself that day to the 6,000 people gathered with these words: "My name is Ken, and I'll be your waiter for a long, long time." He saw himself as a servant, and he lived accordingly. He sold the bishop's residence in Saginaw, and he moved from parish to parish, living with his priests in their rectories. He wanted to be near them, and he wanted to be close to the people whom he was ordained to serve. I met Bishop Untner for the first time in 2000, when I was assigned to the office of the Army Chief of Chaplains as the recruiting and retention officer for Catholic priests. One of my responsibilities was to manage the annual Army Priest Retreat program, which was then held in 3 locations around the world: the U.S., Asia, and Europe. On my way to the 1999 program at the American College in Leuven, Belgium, I read Bishop Untner's book, Preaching Better. I was so impressed with this book that as soon as I arrived at the seminary, I immediately sought out the priest who was teaching homiletics and insisted he read it. And I gave him a copy, and I told him he had to get one for every seminarian. When I returned to Washington, I called the Diocese of Saginaw, and I asked to speak to Bishop Untner or his secretary. Much to my surprise, it was Bishop Untner himself who answered the phone. Classic Ken Untner. He agreed to be our speaker for the Army Priest Retreat in 2000, the next year. Ken was a lot like Pope Francis. Ken loved the poor. He drove a humble car. He lived in simple rectories. He avoided lavish vestments, and he wore simple clothes. He was a man of the people, or as Pope Francis likes to say, he had the smell of the sheep. Some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the little books, like this one, that Ken Untner invented. He started with a little black book for Lent, and then he added the little blue book for Advent and Christmas, and a little white book for Easter, and a little purple book for the young children. In Preaching Better, he focuses first on the people, the folks who hear the homilies, rather than the priests and deacons who give the homilies. What were they hearing? What touched them? What did they like? What did they not like? What did they need? How long did they want homilies to be? and so forth. And then he organized his priests and deacons and lay preachers into groups where they practiced writing and giving homilies. The preaching in Saginaw got a lot better. Ken knew something of suffering. He was born with a club foot, and just before ordination, after breaking his leg, the doctors recommended and then amputated his foot to improve his mobility. He wore a prosthesis for the rest of his life, but he never allowed it to prevent him from playing golf, ice hockey, and handball. He was a very fine athlete. Sadly, he contracted leukemia and died at the age of 66 in 2004. His friend, Archbishop John R. Quinn of San Francisco, wrote to him before his death, I quote, "You have given all of us bishops a striking, powerful, but gentle challenge to live the gospel in a clear way. I have seen how you have been criticized and misrepresented, and how, following the gospel injunction, you have not reacted with rancor or bitterness. You have a depth and wisdom which has been a valuable contribution to the church. Now you are walking the path of the cross in a new way. And my prayer is that you will discover anew that the tree of the cross is the tree of life." In his homily at Bishop Untner's funeral, Archbishop Quinn said, "Ken's simple life was a true fulfillment of the Second Vatican Council's call for bishops to recognize the signs of the times and respond to the apostolic ideal of the gospel." Bishop Untner wrote a beautiful prayer poem in honor of Bishop Oscar Romero, who was martyred in El Salvador in 1990 and is soon to be a saint. Please join me in reading a short part of this prayer poem on page 17 in your program. It helps now and then. My life with Jesus, be not afraid. A majority of Americans still choose the vocation of marriage. And so in this final segment of the talk, I'd like to focus on two couples. One just beginning their life together, and the other recently celebrating their golden anniversary. Last Labor Day, September 2nd, in upstate New York, I officiated at the younger couple's wedding. I've known the groom's family since before he was born, and I baptized him in a tiny chapel on an army caserne in Gelnhausen, Germany, just outside of Hanau. He is presently serving as an infantry captain in the United States Army, and the bride is also a captain in the Army, serving as a military intelligence officer. In this day and age, these two young people are unique for a couple reasons. Fewer and fewer young people are committing themselves to one another in marriage, let alone in the holy sacrament of matrimony. They both come, this couple, from wonderful service-oriented families. The groom's father and grandfather served full careers in the Army. The groom's brother is also presently serving as a captain in the Army. The bride's grandfather served in World War II, and two of her brothers are now serving in the Army. These folks are the real one percenters. Not the super rich one percenters, but the 1% who volunteer to serve in the military uniform of our nation. That said, I suspect that this young couple really doesn't know what they are getting into by vowing for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. Any more than Francis de Sales or Ken Utner really knew what they were getting into vowing chastity and being ordained priests. None of us has that kind of hindsight, and yet people take the plunge. At the young couple's wedding, I gave a very upbeat homily, but the next morning, I gathered with the bride and groom and their immediate families for a very casual home mass. In my homily that morning, with the rain pouring down outside, contrasting sharply with the sun-soaked wedding day, I told a somewhat more somber story about the couple who recently celebrated 50 years of marriage. This older couple met in the City of Light, where Francis de Sales went to study, Paris. The groom was an Army military policeman serving at the U.S. Embassy in Paris. The bride was an American girl working as an au pair. Talk about romantic. But just like the young couple I married last September, they had no idea what they were getting into. 6 years ago, the husband had a massive stroke and almost died. At the time, I was serving as their pastor, and I went to anoint him. And you've already heard part of the story. He pulled through, but can walk now only with assistance and must spend most of his time in a wheelchair. His partner, that naive young woman of Paris fame, remembered her vows, for better, for worse, in sickness and in health. She has dedicated herself to his care and to keeping their lives as normal as possible. They volunteer every Thursday at their parish center, answering phones, greeting people, folding bulletins. They continue to volunteer as ushers at Wolf Trap. They usher together at weekend masses. In short, they try to go on with their lives, doing the will of God as they are given to know it. Sometimes, sharing in the passion of Christ simply means going to work every day, changing diapers, cooking meals, cleaning the house, supervising homework. In short, sacrificing for the kids so that they can have a better life. I'm convinced the greatest gift that parents can give their children is to be good parents. The faithfulness of folks like these two couples inspires me. The older I get, the more convinced I am that marriage is a much tougher vocation than the priesthood or religious life. Brother priest, am I right? This is why I believe that Pope Francis is calling for more emphasis and study about marriage and family, with all their complexities and challenges. In his apostolic exhortation, Amoris Laetitia, he writes, "The joy of love experienced by families is also the joy of the church. The desire to marry and form a family remains vibrant, especially among young people. And this is an inspiration to the church. It is my hope," he writes, "that in reading this text, all will feel called to love and cherish family life. For families are not a problem. They are first and foremost an opportunity." Please turn with me in your program to page 18. The solemn blessing taken from the rite of marriage. And pray with me this blessing for all married couples and those who will choose the wonderful vocation of marriage. May God eternally keep you in one heart, love for one another, that the peace of Christ may dwell in you, and abide always in your home. May you be blessed in your children, have solace in your friends, and enjoy true peace with everyone. May you be witnesses to the world of God's charity, so that the afflicted and needy, with knowing your kindness, may one day receive you thankfully in eternal love. Amen. Every day when I say morning prayer and I get to the intercessions, my first petition is for all for whom I have promised to pray. I can't remember everyone, but I know that God can. And so now, all of you will be remembered every day. I promise to pray for you. Gabriel Stass, Francis DeSales, Ken Upner, and our two courageous married couples are examples of how to live a life with Jesus and not be afraid. As we move into the break in just a moment, Gerard is going to put on Josh Groban's "You Raise Me Up." I heard this hymn almost, I guess you could say, for the first time when I was the pastor at the Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And I had never heard of Josh Groban, but our teenagers put on a passion play. And at the end of the passion play, they played this song, "You Raise Me Up." And I think it's very appropriate for what we are about today in not being afraid. Thank you, and God bless you all.